Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. My mother mentioned Cade on the drive from the airport. She picked me up herself, which she still insisted on doing even though the drive was 40 minutes each way and the traffic heading out of the city had gotten worse every year. I'd given up arguing about it. I put my bag in the back seat and got in. She pulled out of the pickup lane talking the way she always talked when she hadn't seen me in a while, filling in everything that had happened since our last call. She mentioned the neighbor's new fence. She mentioned that my father had thrown his back out again and was being stubborn about seeing a doctor. She mentioned that Cade had helped them move some boxes out of the garage the previous weekend. I let it sit for a few seconds because I thought I'd misheard her. "Who?" I said. She glanced over at me. "Cade. He came by Saturday." She said it the way you reference someone whose name needs no setup. Then she went back to talking about my father's back. I didn't push it. I told myself it was a neighbor. Maybe someone from their church group, a name I'd somehow forgotten. We'd figure it out when we got to the house. I was an only child. I had been my entire life. My parents' house was the same house I'd grown up in, a 2-story craftsman on the east side of town with a front porch that had needed repainting for years. I had offered to do it myself on every visit and my father declined every time, which was its own long-standing dynamic between us. He was in the living room when we arrived, back propped against 2 cushions, watching television. He greeted me warmly but briefly, asked about the flight, said my mother had made too much food as usual. Then he said, "Did Cade reach out before you flew in? He mentioned he might try to catch you." I sat down in the chair across from him. "I don't know who that is," I said. My father looked at me the way he looked at me when he thought I was being strange. "Your brother," he said. "Cade." I held his gaze. There was nothing in his face that suggested a joke, a test, or confusion. He looked like a man who had just stated a plain fact and was mildly puzzled that it needed confirming. "Dad," I said, "I don't have a brother." He turned back to the television. "You're tired from the flight," he said. "Go wash up. Dinner's almost ready." There were photographs. I found them after dinner, moving through the house the way I always did on the first night back, reacquainting myself with the rooms. The hallway between the kitchen and the stairs had always held family photos, and I knew every one of them. My parents' wedding, my grandparents, my school pictures going back to kindergarten, slightly embarrassing, never removed. There was a boy in some of them now. Not everyone, but enough. He appeared in a vacation photo I remembered clearly, except I remembered that trip as the 3 of us, and now there were 4 people in the frame. He was in a birthday photo where I recognized the table and the cake, but didn't recognize him. In the most recent photo, which I didn't recognize at all, he was an adult standing in my parents' backyard with his arm around my mother's shoulders, both of them squinting happily into the sun. He had our family's look, the coloring, the jaw, the way he stood. He looked like he belonged in those photographs, the same way I looked like I belonged in them. I stood in that hallway for a long time without moving. I barely slept. In the morning, I came downstairs early and sat at the kitchen table while my mother made coffee, and I asked about Cade in a way I tried to keep light and conversational. She told me he was 2 years older than me, that he'd moved out at 22 and lived about an hour north now, worked in property management, that he and I had always been close growing up, but distance and different schedules had made things complicated in adulthood, which was nobody's fault. She said all of it with the easy familiarity of someone recounting settled family history. She mentioned a camping trip we'd apparently taken together as kids and described something funny I'd done that had made everyone laugh. Except I remembered that camping trip. I remembered it clearly. I'd been alone with my parents. I was the one who'd done the thing she was laughing about, and in my memory, it was just the three of us sitting around a fire. In her version, Cade was there, and the moment belonged to both of us. I asked her to show me his room. She looked at me with a mild, puzzled expression, but led me down the hall to the room at the end of the second floor. That room had been used for storage my entire childhood. Boxes, an old treadmill, my father's filing cabinet stacked along the far wall. She opened the door, and it was a bedroom. Not recently converted, a bedroom that looked like it had been a bedroom for a very long time. The furniture had the scuffs and slight settling of pieces that hadn't been moved in decades. A bookshelf held books with bent spines. A closet still had a few things hanging in it, items a young man might have left behind without thinking. The walls had old adhesive marks where posters had been hung and eventually pulled down. I pressed my hand flat against the wall. The paint was old. The floor near the window had a sun-fade line that took years to develop. I thanked her and went back downstairs and sat with my coffee and didn't say anything for a while. I spent the next 2 days watching my family. What I was watching for was inconsistency, the kind of small slippage that would tell me their memories of Cade were thin, recently constructed, something placed over the real history like a coat of paint over old plaster. I didn't find it. Their memories of him were as solid and specific as their memories of me. My mother knew his coffee order. She knew his opinions about things. She knew the name of a friend he'd had in high school and what had eventually happened to that friendship. My father referenced an argument he and Cade had when Cade was 17 with the resigned, worn-out affection of someone who'd long since processed it and let it go. What I did find was that their memories of me were thinning. It was small at first, easy to dismiss. My mother told a story from my childhood and attributed the central moment to Cade. My father described something I remembered clearly, but got a specific detail wrong in a way that made me the background of the memory instead of the center. When I corrected him, he went briefly quiet, the way a person goes quiet when they reach for something familiar and find it slightly out of place. My own history in this house was being shouldered aside, not erased, not yet. But every space Cade occupied in their memories was a space with a little less room for me, and the pressure was slow and steady and moving in one direction. I called a woman I'd been close with in high school, someone who'd spent enough time at my parents' house as a kid that she'd have a clear memory of the household. I asked her, casually as I could manage, if she remembered my brother. She said she hadn't known I had one. I asked if she remembered anyone named Cade. A pause. Then she said, "Petra, are you doing okay?" I told her I was fine and got off the phone. My mother mentioned over breakfast on the third morning that Cade lived in a town called Renfield, about an hour north. She said it without context, slipped into conversation while she was talking about something else entirely. I don't think she noticed she'd said it. I told my parents I was visiting an old friend and got in the rental car and drove north. Renfield was small, the kind of town that existed mostly to service the larger towns around it. I spent about an hour going through public records online before I found what I needed, a rental address on a residential street near the edge of town. It was a small single-story house with beige siding and a carport. A truck was parked under it. I sat outside for a few minutes with the engine off, watching the house, not entirely sure what I was planning to say. Then I got out and knocked. He answered on the second knock. Tall, our family's coloring, the jaw I'd seen in the photographs. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't prepared myself for. Not surprise, not guilt, something closer to relief. And underneath the relief, a sadness that had the quality of something very old and very settled. He said my name, not as a question, just as a fact, the way you'd acknowledge someone you'd been expecting. You know who I am, I said. I've always known who you are, he said. Come in if you want. I went in. We sat at a small kitchen table with coffee neither of us drank much of, and he talked for a long time. In the world he came from. I had died when I was 7 years old. A fever that moved too fast and landed too hard. The kind of thing that, in other circumstances, with slightly different timing, would have been manageable. In his world, it wasn't. He said our parents had held together afterward, which was more than some families managed. But the holding together had a cost to it that he'd grown up inside of, without fully understanding until he was much older. The house was quieter than it should have been. There were rooms nobody went into. His mother laughed at things the way a person laughs when they've had to relearn how to do it. He grew up as an only child in a house that had been built for more people than it contained. He said it like that, not as a complaint, just as a plain description of a fact about his life. He was in his late 30s when he found the way across. Again, he didn't explain the mechanics, and I didn't ask. What mattered was what he'd done with it. He came to see them, just to see them. He told me that the first time, he'd just driven past the house, sat outside for 20 minutes and left. The second time, he'd knocked on the door, and my mother had answered, and he'd told her he was a friend of mine from out of town and asked if she knew how to reach me. My mother, he said, had looked at him for a long moment. Then she'd asked him to come in for coffee. He'd come back. Not often at first. Once a month, then more. He brought things. Fixed a light fixture my father had been putting off. Helped move boxes. Sat at the kitchen table and talked. The way you sit and talk with people you've known for a long time. He said he hadn't done anything deliberate to alter their memories. He hadn't suggested anything, hadn't planted anything, hadn't tried to make them believe anything specific. He'd just been present, consistently, over time. And their memories had bent around him the way memories do around things that are always there. I sat with that for a while. And I asked him about mine, about my place in their memories thinning, about the camping trip that was becoming his instead of mine, about the spaces he was slowly filling that had been mine first. He looked down at the table. He said he hadn't intended that. He said it quietly, without excuse, and I believed him in the same way you believe someone when the remorse is old enough that it stopped performing. But intending it and doing it were two different things. I asked him what he wanted, not in an accusatory way. I genuinely wanted to know. He took a long time answering. He said he wanted what he'd always wanted, which was to sit at that kitchen table and have his mother ask him if he wanted more coffee. He said he knew that wasn't a reasonable thing to want. He said he'd known that for a long time and hadn't been able to stop anyway. I thought about my mother describing the camping trip, the warmth in her voice, the way she'd laughed. I thought about the way she'd looked in that photograph in the backyard, squinting into the sun with her arm around a son she'd never had and a happiness on her face that was completely real. I told him he had to stop. He nodded. He'd been nodding slowly since before I'd said it, like he'd already arrived at the same place and was waiting for the conversation to catch up. He left Renfield that week. He called my mother to say he was moving further away for work and wasn't sure when he'd be back. I don't know what she said to him. She mentioned the call to me that evening in a way that was brief and didn't invite much discussion, and I let it be brief. The unraveling was gradual. Over the following weeks, the photographs changed. Not all at once, not dramatically. I'd look at the hallway wall, and a photo that had held 4 people would hold 3 again, and I couldn't have told you exactly when it shifted. My mother stopped referencing the camping trip with Cade in it. My father stopped mentioning him casually the way you mention a family member who's just slightly out of regular contact. By the end of the month, most of it was gone. The bedroom at the end of the hall was a storage room again. Boxes stacked against the wall. The treadmill back in the corner. I didn't ask about it. I just opened the door once to check, then closed it again. My own memories came back into focus in their conversations. Stories returned to me. Details that had been slightly wrong corrected themselves, and my parents didn't seem to notice the correction, just told the stories the way they'd always told them. Most of it came back, not all of it. My mother held on to one memory. I noticed it about 6 weeks after Cade left. She mentioned, while we were on the phone, a morning from when I was 10 years old. She described it in detail. The weather, what we'd had for breakfast, a specific thing that had made her laugh until she had to sit down. In her telling, it was the 2 of us, just her and a child who was not quite me, doing something ordinary and good on a regular morning. In my memory, that morning had just been me. I'd been alone with her in the kitchen, and I'd done the thing that had made her laugh. And it had been one of those small, private moments that doesn't mean anything to anyone else, but stays with you anyway. In her memory, Cade was there. I started to say something. I had the sentence ready. Then I stopped. She was laughing again, just lightly, just at the memory of it. And the laugh was real and easy and uncomplicated in a way that her laughs hadn't always been when I was growing up. I'd noticed that without having a name for it when I was a kid, the slight effort behind certain moments of happiness, the way joy in our house had sometimes felt like something being maintained rather than something that arrived on its own. That laugh didn't sound like maintenance. I let her finish the memory. I said that I remembered that morning too, which was true, and that it was a good one, which was also true. I didn't take it from her. I think about Cade occasionally. I wonder where he ended up, whether he found his way back to his own world, or whether he's somewhere in this one, in a different city, sitting outside a house that contains people he lost a long time ago and trying to decide whether to knock on the door. I don't know what the right answer is for a person in that position. I'm not sure there is one. What I know is this: the people we lose leave spaces in us that don't fill in cleanly, and sometimes the things we do to manage those spaces make sense from the inside, even when they cause damage from the outside. I know that because I watched my parents live with a quiet version of that their whole lives, a space left by a daughter in another world that they didn't know existed, a loss they'd never experienced, but that it had somehow shaped the particular quality of their happiness anyway. Or maybe I'm reaching. Maybe I'm trying to make it mean something, because the alternative is that it was simply strange and sad and doesn't resolve into anything useful. My mother called last week. She talked about the neighbor's fence again, about my father's back, about a trip she and my father were thinking about taking in the spring. She sounded good, easy. Before we hung up, she mentioned that morning again, the one from when I was 10. She said she'd been thinking about it lately for no particular reason, the way old memories surface sometimes. "That was a good morning," she said. I told her it was. I meant it.